Welcome to the Toronto International Film Festival. I'm Tom Powers, the documentary programmer. I'm so pleased to be here for this Q&A for the international premiere of The Rescue, joined by filmmakers Vasarhelyi and Jimmy Chin. They were at Tiff 3 years ago in 2018 with their film Free Solo that won the People's Choice Documentary Award and went on to win the Oscar for Best Documentary. Chai and Jimmy, it is great to have you back.
Thank you. We're so excited to be back. And thank you for welcoming The Rescue.
It's so nice to see you, Tom.
So we're recording this a few weeks before the festival. You're literally in the mixing process right now. I want to ask you, so this story received saturation news coverage at the time it happened a few years ago. What was it that pulled you into wanting to tell this version of the story?
You know, I think it really comes down to how this story underlines our common humanity. It reminds us of our connections. It reminds us that really no matter where you're from, you do care about someone else's children who are stuck in a cave. And there's an absolute morality to it about if you are the only person in the world who can do something, you have to do it. And that was the case with this rescue. And so I think it's we love this movie mostly because it reminds us of connections.
So Jimmy, your previous films with Chai, Meru and Free Solo are about mountain climbing, where you personally have more experience, I think, than in cave diving. But can you talk about what you found similar in the experience of these adventures and what's different about the cave divers from what you're usually doing?
I mean, I found a lot of commonalities between cave diving and mountain climbing. You're managing extraordinary risks. And I also think that, they're functioning in an environment where the stakes are very, very high. Oftentimes you're facing very huge challenges, what seem like insurmountable challenges. And just the mentality of how you deal with that kind of environment is something I'm familiar with. And I think working with the divers and kind of having a little bit of credibility with them too, because I think there's an understanding that, we all kind of pursue these, what you might call, well, climbing's now much more popular, but kind of these lifestyle sports where you really have to devote your life to the sport and really shape your life around these pursuits. So that obviously had a lot of appeal for me, kind of getting into the minds of these divers. But I think what's very different about this endeavor, while it is about kind of facing these insurmountable odds, making very difficult decisions with very high stakes potential outcomes, is that the stakes included the lives of these children. It wasn't just a decision you're making for yourself, and this wasn't just for fun, and this wasn't just for your own adventure. This was really, a different twist on that world, in that you were responsible for a lot of other people's lives.
Yeah. Chai, in the film, you're skillfully combining footage that you got from the rescuers along with images that you recreated because no other footage existed to capture it. Can you talk about how you balance those and blended those different sources of footage?
Well, I always like to say it's most exciting in nonfiction when you have obstacles and how you find your way around them. This was a little bit extreme. It was pitch black. There was no footage, and if there was footage, it was muddy and black. So it just, we kind of approached it. One, it was also in addition to COVID. Okay. So it's not like we can go to Thailand and knock on every door yet. And so basically it was a very, very deep archival process, just kind of getting bits and pieces from international media to have enough to kind of illustrate the story. And we had always heard that the Thai Navy SEALs had filmed. And I mean, we've been corresponding with them via Zoom for 2 years. And it was only after, I had my second vaccine that I was able to go to Thailand and meet with them, and they decided to work with us. And we had this, like, it's never before seen footage, stuff that like the divers themselves didn't know existed. And what's so interesting and fun about it is that, like, the underwater footage is very important. And that was almost impossible to film even by the Thai Navy SEALs. So that's the stuff that's mostly reenacted. But then you have this really interesting blend between what we've reenacted with the real participants reenacting what they did, as well as this never before seen footage of the children and also the divers. And these moments, like when they actually when they found the kids, when they first told the Thais that they found the kids, like these are things that, give you goosebumps. So yeah, I mean, it's been very challenging, Tom.
I would also just add that, being able to really work with the participants, the divers, and, in the world that I come from in climbing, oftentimes, if you're not paying close attention, the details and the authenticity of, these sports is lost. And, that's really hard for me as a climber when I see it. And so it was really important for us to make sure that we worked really closely with the divers so that they could give their input and really do a very, very accurate job of help us do a really good, accurate job of representing what they did.
So not to dwell on this too long, but can you just describe how you set up those recreation scenes where I think you were filming in a studio, am I right?
Yes. Given the constraints, like normally we would have, if we were reenacting, we would have gone to the real cave with the real people, but traveling to Thailand was not possible at the time. So we were in England and we used a tank in a studio and had the real British divers reenact what they did. And it was pretty ghetto. But there's a lot, it's like all about the smoke and mirrors of filmmaking. And I think my favorite part was like one of the grips, it was like these British people was like, hey, I found an extra piece of a cave that they use in like a big blockbuster. We can bring it in and use it for you guys. So I think it's like, this is going to play after the film. So like one of the best examples of this is when Dr. Harry first anesthetized a child. And so you see him in the real footage, have a child sit in his lap, and he gives him the shots. Okay, and this is stuff that was shot in his own GoPro. And then you cut to our reenactments where you see Jason take a child underwater. And then you come up again and like you're actually looking at the real footage when the child is being taken away, like being whisked away out of the cave. And there are 200 volunteers lined up, and it's like hand to hand handing the child over. So it's just it's actually quite interesting. It's been fun craft-wise to think about how to blend it and also how you're very clear about what you're doing, but trying to remain true, trying to really express the truth of the story.
Yeah. I want to ask about the interview process. Jimmy, you talked about some credibility that you were able to establish with the people you're interviewing because of your own background. But one of the things that really stands out to me about the interviews is how you're able to draw out very personal stories from these men who, by their own description, are kind of social outsiders and people who keep things close inside. So can you talk about those interviews?
I mean, I think being married to one has made this all much easier. It's just
she has a lot of practice.
It's something we do. I have to say they probably get like more of a discomfort factor even than Alex did, like Alex Honnold in Free Solo. But, Tom, just remember a lot of these were over Zoom, so it's even weirder. Like you can't even go hang out afterwards or the night before. But I don't know, like I think these are fascinating guys who did the right thing and who remind us of like what the right thing is, in a time when we're all so separate and like, thinking internal. And it was really fun talking to them, and it was long though. Like I found that like over Zoom, these interviews become very, very long because you don't have, I don't know, you're not sitting in the same room together.
I also think they had all watched our previous films that China had done together. And I think that they did feel a certain level of comfort because I think they enjoyed those films and felt like, you know, we had taken the time to really dig in and tell the story in a way that they appreciated. So there was a certain level of openness, I believe, to working with us. But I also think that, you know, it was a big challenge not to have that in between time, you know, normally like before the interview where you can kind of hang out, or, you know, you go and have dinner after an interview, come back the next day and have another interview. I mean, that was not a possibility. But I think overall we're very happy with what we came out with, and they were very eloquent in telling their story.
Yeah. Can you talk about the choice in the film to focus on the rescuers? You know, coming to the story from the outside, you hear about Thai cave rescue. You know, first thing you think about are the kids and their coach who were rescued. And I think one of the interesting things about this film is it gives us a perspective on the people that we didn't know that much about.
Our idea was always to have the point of view of someone from the outside, like the audience as well as us didn't know if the children were alive, right? And, you know, in addition, like just the reality is we didn't have access to the children because another studio had purchased the rights. But, you know, we are telling the story of the rescue, and that was affected by this group of weekend warriors. Like, they're not professional divers. One's like a retired fireman, one's an IT consultant, electrician, contractor, who decided to pursue over many, many years cave diving. Like, it's a very, very esoteric sport, and which had made them the best in the world. And so it was one of those things that, like, it's, I don't know, it's kind of like Free Solo in that, like, it's about really coming to understand these very complicated, quite nerdy characters and understanding and seeing the world through their eyes. And it was, you know, no special forces in the world could have affected that rescue. They couldn't, like, cave diving is that unique. And we were really captivated by the stories of these Brits and the Australians. And again, I want to come back to the absolute morality of, like, no one else can do it and you can. And you've only something to lose, right? Like, these guys could only lose. You know, they really truly believe they would.
They're
one or
risking
two
their
kids.
lives.
Yeah.
If it didn't turn out well, they could end up in the Thai judicial system. I mean, they really put a lot on the line for these kids, and they're essentially just, you know, civilians. They're not professional rescuers either. You know, so, you know, they're not getting paid, certainly. So that story to us was very meaningful. And I also think, just, you know, in terms of the Thai Navy SEALs and, you know, just all the kind of global community that came together to effect this rescue, and how people from different cultures and different worlds had to kind of come together despite, you know, cultural differences, and to be able to pull this off.
Chai, I can remember you calling me from Thailand after, when you had flown there and had made this deal with the Thai Navy SEALs to get this footage, and the excitement in your voice because of what it meant for the film. Can you talk more about, you know, what that you know, diplomacy took to win them over to share their footage with you?
I mean, it's just really complicated because of COVID. And had I met, you know, Sasiman, who's one of our executive producers, in person, I think this would have been much easier. But, like, you know, Thai culture is quite complex, and the like, normally in your first meeting you would never talk about business, and so all of our interactions have been over Zoom, and really truly, like, there was a rumor that the footage existed. We were anticipating 90 minutes. And when we finally saw it, and it was 87 hours, and this was 3 months ago, you know, 2.5 months ago, it just blew our mind. And it was one of those things that, like, we could have only imagined what it was actually like to be there. Like, this is the first film we've ever made that we weren't there when it was shot. You know, I did have the privilege of going to the cave and actually like being able to walk fully into the cave, see where the children stood, like had stayed, like understand the chambers the way it is. But just there, it's like one of those exciting moments in like nonfiction is when you actually find material that allows you to be transported. And so, yeah, it was really difficult. It was a 2-week quarantine. It was very diplomatic. I was challenged in many ways, but it was always the right thing to do because, you know, I think Jimmy and I also took this film mainly in addition because we thought it was really important to represent the Thai point of view and the Asian point of view. There are very few positive stories about nonfiction stories about Asians. And the bravery of the Thai Navy SEALs who would, like, I mean, the Dr. Pak, who's in the film, he'd never been in a cave dive before. And he had a son who was waiting outside the cave. But he went in and understood that he was there until the bitter end. And he would never leave those kids if they were going to die. And just that idea of like going into like the pitch black, like murk, you don't know what's around the next corner. There is no map. You know, that's the stuff that really moved me about this. It's like, and what compels you to do that? Like, why do you save people you don't know? You know, it's just, so anyway, so it was a great bravery that transpired. And I think there's also like an East-West part of this film, which we're interested in where, you know, it's hard to really understand the spirituality involved, but, you know, people do believe that there's spirits in the mountain, like that she is a spirit. And like, it's funny, like I really was excited to explore those moments where like the Brits like had no idea and would think it was like crazy. And yet the Thais were like, no, this is really important to us. And, you know, it's like the friction of it, which is kind of encapsulated in our negotiations from Thailand and the Thai Navy SEALs, is part of the story.
Now, obviously, you had to limit the number of stories you tell to fit in a feature-length film. But what should we understand about the scale of this rescue and how many people it took, and some of those stories that aren't covered in here?
When I actually saw the cave, even the fact that there are about 3,500 people working on the rescue, it still seemed impossible that could have been achieved. You finally understand why you needed thousands of people around. Just like the sheer distance of transporting the tanks, the sheer size,
the challenge, the difficulty of moving.
I mean, each tank is 60 pounds. It's perilous. Like, just even like when you understand what they were walking through in the pitch black, it's almost inconceivable. But there are many stories associated with this. I mean, there were like the idea really that there were thousands of volunteers who just started showing up to help. You know, it's hard.
Yeah, cooking food for the rescuers. I mean, it was a huge kind of global effort.
And the great efforts that went into other options, like, you know, trying to drill, trying to find the kids and figuring out new, you know, shaft way in, trying to pump out the water diversion. Like, this took thousands of people, and it just ended up that they were running out of time, and so diving was the only option. Because they're running out of oxygen, like air. And so, I don't know, Tom, like this story could be told over many, many hours. And we've tried our best.
So as I wrap this up, I want to know what you want audiences to take away from this film.
Well, you know, come on this journey and go with it and kind of experience like the impossible rescue and these insurmountable odds, but also like, especially in this time when we're also divided both politically and physically, you know, let's be reminded about what connects us. You know, most of those rescuers were parents, and they were willing to risk everything to save someone else's kid. And that really, really moved me, despite all the misunderstandings, the mistranslations, the whole thing. You know, the complications, it didn't matter. It came down to, we have to do this. And the thousands of people who showed up to volunteer. So I think let's be reminded of our common humanity, what makes us humans.
Chai and Jimmy, thank you for this film. I've always had great experiences with your films at the festival, and we're delighted to have you back.
Yay.
Well, thank you.
And we're very happy to be coming also in person, Tom.
Yeah.
So
Looking forward
can't wait to see you.
All right.